Welcome back. 5:46 now on Daybreak, and yesterday was a day we will look back to for decades. But this morning, we're remembering the Elmwood of old, big-time boxing in Buffalo, and some names from the past that you might recall. They all made news this very week in decades past. Dave McKinley has our weekly walk down memory lane when those stories and more were all news to you.
10 years ago this week, when state lawmakers were still debating whether to allow medicinal marijuana, let alone its recreational use, approval was given for Buffalo's first hookah lounge. We were getting the first reports that Bon Jovi was interested in buying the Bills, and from our News to You, a what could have been department, the Bills did have a pre-draft visit with a wide receiver from LSU, name of Odell Beckham Jr. A disturbing trend among vandals involved the flipping of so-called smart cars, and in a blow to preservationists, a judge said a developer could move forward with plans to transform the entrance to the Elmwood Village near Forest. Opponents had argued that a law was passed in 1892 that only houses could be zoned here, but the judge noted that for years what were homes back then had been used for decades to house businesses. The long and short of it is, here's how that same area now looks today. And in Forestville, there was concern of a proposed budget calling for a 445% property tax hike, which would raise the taxes paid on a $50,000 home from $257 to $1,400 annually. 10 years later, it begs the question, what's more astounding, a tax hike of that size or that you could still buy a house for $50,000 this week in 2014? 20 years ago this week, and just 2.5 years removed from 9/11.
The FBI is alerting local and state police that trains, including subways and buses, could be the next terror target.
If they're worried, then I'm worried too.
To combat the dominance of conservative talk radio hosts like Rush Limbaugh, the other side came up with Air America, whose slate of hosts included Al Franken.
It's about relentlessly hammering away at the Bush administration until they crack and crumble this November, because don't get me wrong, friends, they are going down.
Well, that certainly didn't happen, and as for Air America, it went belly up, as in bankrupt, not even 3 years after it launched this week in 2004. 30 years ago this week, when you could land a job with the airlines for how much?
Starting salary about $5.25 an hour.
Back then, just like now, the Israelis and Palestinians were still fighting. And then, just like now, there was concern about violence among young people. The advice given by youth at the time?
If the parents get control over their child and teach them what's right and wrong from the beginning, that's what really counts.
Meanwhile,
This whole whitewater has almost taken on a life of its own.
And it would continue to far beyond this week in 1994. 40 years ago this week, Buffalo fight fans still stinging from the loss of a bout 2 years prior featuring Sugar Ray Leonard. After an eye injury KO'd the champ's plans to compete here, were thrilled when it was announced another prize pugilist would defend his title in the Queen City, where he actually had some roots.
All my relatives are here. This is the American home of my grandfather when he came from Sicily.
This week's News to You pop quiz, do you know who this is? Name this boxer who would end up losing his WBA lightweight title in Buffalo 2 months later. Remember, this was back when amid persistent spring snow, the final rails were being installed on Lower Main Street, and where, below ground, we were getting our first glimpse inside the subway stations that would eventually serve the yet-to-be-opened NFTA Metro Rail. And when your all-star lineup included
Roxanne Orlando,
Sandy Cozell,
Beverly Armstrong,
Mary Miller,
Penny Williams, Suzanne Chamberlain,
Tony Farina, News Center 2.
This week in 1984, when it was all news to you.
Okay, so the answer to this week's News to You pop quiz, the prize fighter who announced his next big bout would be in Buffalo 40 years this week. Ray Boom Boom Mancini.
Oh my goodness.
He was the WBA lightweight champion when he fought Livingstone Bramble at the Aud that June, but then lost the title. And he also ended up spending the night at Millard Fillmore Hospital, where he needed 71 stitches to close a cut around his eye.
Now, who was that next to him? Was that his trainer or his agent? He came right out of Central Casting, that guy. Right.
Along with Ray Boom Boom Mancini.
Yeah, oh my gosh.
Yeah, I love Dave's News to Yous and looking back on the subway. I mean, the Metro Rail, but my mom always called it the subway. We were so excited to take the subway. But anyway,
that was cool.
So many years ago.
All right, let's